Australia did not decide to enter the First World War. Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914. Australia, as a dominion of the British Empire, was at war from that moment. There was no separate Australian decision, no vote, no debate whether to join or not. What Australia decided was the scale of its commitment, and that's a completely different question, and it's the one your students should actually be investigating. Last episode, we covered the first half of this content description, the causes of World War I. That's European diplomatic history. The second episode, the reasons why Australians enlisted, that's Australian social history, which means different sources, different questions, different activities. Most units teach the first half for a fortnight and the second half in a paragraph about loyalty to Britain. That gap is what this episode is all about. Here's something that surprises most people. Australia was in the middle of a federal election campaign when the war broke out. On the 31st of July 1914, in Colac in Victoria, the leader of the opposition, Andrew Fisher, pledged that Australia would stand by Britain to the last man and the last shilling. The following night, in the same town, the Prime Minister, Joseph Cook, said, "If the old country is at war, so are we." Notice the details. Fisher was not Prime Minister when he said it. Britain had not yet declared war, and the commitment was bipartisan, made on consecutive nights in a country town during an election campaign. Fisher went on to win that election in September and took office. By then, the Empire had already been at war for 6 weeks. And now, the single most important fact about Australian enlistment. The AIF, or Australian Imperial Force, was a volunteer force for the entire war. Every man who served overseas chose to. There were 2 conscription referendums in October 1916 and December 1917. Australians defeated both. Australia was one of the very few combatant nations that never introduced conscription for overseas service. Everything that follows only matters because of that. In a conscript army, when men served is a question about the state. In the AIF, it is a question about the hundreds of thousands of individual decisions. The scale? 416,809 enlistments from a population of under 5 million. The Roll of Honour records 61,514 Australian deaths, a further 156,000 wounded, gassed, or taken prisoner. Proportionally, one of the highest casualty rates of any nation in the war. But here's the wrinkle, and it is the most useful thing in this episode. The enlistment figure itself is disputed. Research, working from attestation papers, argues that the official count is overstated by close to 10% because it counts applications to enlist rather than actual enlistments. The more defensible number may be nearer to 379,000. Even the enlistment number is contested. That's not a problem for your teaching, that's the gift. A statistic is a source. It was produced by someone for a purpose under constraint. It can be interrogated exactly like a diary or a photograph or even a recruiting poster. So, now we ask the question, why did they go? The textbook answer is loyalty to Britain and the Empire. That's a real answer. It's also incomplete, and it's usually the only one that's taught. So here are 6 reasons that I believe Australians went. I'm not going to rank them because ranking them changes depending on who you ask and when, so they're in no particular order. First one, imperial loyalty. Most Australians in 1914 were British subjects. A great many were British born. The attachment was not manufactured and it was not shallow. But treating it as the whole answer flattens everything else, and it makes the men who enlisted less interesting than they actually were. Pay. The AIF paid a private 6 shillings a day, roughly 3 times what a British private received, and the best rate of any army in the war, hence the nickname 6 bob a day tourists. And in 1914 brought drought and unemployment across parts of Australia. So, for some families, a son in the AIF was the most reliable income they had. Adventure. For a young man from a country town who had never left his district, this was paid passage to Egypt, England, and France. We find that motive uncomfortable now, but in 1914, it was ordinary and it was openly stated. Community pressure. The recruiting marches are superb teaching material. Men walked from town to town collecting volunteers as they went. There's a Queensland one, the Dungaree March from Warwick to Brisbane in late 1915. There was also the Cooey March, the Gilgandra, and the Kangaroo March from Wagga Wagga. And there was pressure of a less pleasant kind, including white feathers handed to men in the streets. Mates. Men enlisted in groups, sporting clubs, workplaces, whole streets signing on together, which meant they could also die in groups. A single afternoon on the Western Front could gut a small Australian town. Obligation. From 1916 onwards, a different motive dominates. Not enthusiasm, but obligation. To the men already over there, and increasingly to those who had died. Motivation is not static. This is the analytical point your students need most. A man enlisting in 1914 and a man enlisting in October 1916 are answering very different questions. Enlistment peaked in the middle of 1915 after news of the Gallipoli landings reached home. Then it fell away sharply through 1916 as the casualty lists from Fromelles and Pozières arrived. Same country, same war, completely different decision for those enlisting. Now, the part that changes the meaning of everything I've just said. The Defense Act excluded from service anyone not substantially of European origin or descent. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men were barred from enlisting. Roughly 1,000 served anyway. That number is an estimate, and it always will be, because the enlistment process did not record ethnicity and because many men concealed their identity to get in. Some enlisted as Maori, some as Indian, and some as Italian. They served for the same reason as everyone else, but often for one more. Some hoped that service would become the argument that finally won them the rights they wanted at home. In 1917, the rule was relaxed to admit men with one parent of European origin. Look at when. After the first conscription referendum failed and the army needed reinforcements. The bar came down when the empire needed bodies, not when the argument was won. And the men who served came home to a country where they were still barred from voting in several jurisdictions, still excluded from being counted in Commonwealth census, and largely shut out of soldier settlement schemes granted to other returned men. Now, 3 sources that work in a classroom. The first one, recruitment posters. They're free from the Australian War Memorial, but frame them properly. A poster tells you what recruiters believed would work. It is evidence of persuasion strategy, not evidence of motivation. Getting students to see the gap is a genuine source analysis lesson. Monthly enlistment data. Plotted against timeline of battle news, and students find the 1915 spike and the 1916 collapse themselves. And finally, soldiers' letters and diaries. Soldiers' letters and diaries. On the memorial site, as well as on Trove, Bill Gamagi's The Broken Years is built from these and is still the best guide to using them. And here's the move that makes the whole thing work. Don't ask students to list 3 reasons Australians enlisted in World War I. That's a comprehension task, and the loyalty answer passes it. Instead, ask the question, why did enlistment fall by more than half between 1915 and 1917? That question can't be answered with loyalty alone, which is exactly why it works. Finally, if you want to go a bit deeper, here's some sources. Joan Beaumont, Broken Nation, Bill Gamagi, The Broken Years, and the Australian War Memorial, or Trove, are both excellent and free resources. Now, thank you for hanging out with me again for about 10 minutes. If you want more on World War I, let me know. The next thing I'll look at is Gallipoli, the Western Front, and the nature of warfare. However, I am totally prepared to do something else if that's what you want. Just let me know in the feedback.